I think, is it 5 folks we're supposed to have? Are we?
Yeah, we have a quorum.
Okay, all right. Then I can go ahead and ask that we call the roll.
Great. Councilmember Reed.
I did get a message from him saying that he would be late.
Okay.
Matthew, could you turn your mic up a little bit?
I'm sorry, I forgot my headset, which is inopportune. Does that help? Can you hear me better now?
A little bit.
Yeah. After I do the roll, I'll see if I can figure something out. So Kimberly Walton, Lashandra Rayfield,
Present.
Katie McFadden,
Present.
Omar Salem, Alejandra Darlene Cannon,
Present.
Jane Grover,
I'm here.
and Carla Thomas.
I'm here.
So we have a quorum.
Perfect. I am going to, I was working on something I'm presenting. I'm going to bring up the agenda. All right, so can we start by, Jane, you were making a recommendation for the minutes of last meeting that needed to be,
Yeah.
I mean, 2 meetings ago.
Yeah, the last meeting, the minutes that were in our packet, just to amend them to
Okay.
reflect that Alejandra Benyas was not a commission member at the time.
Okay,
So to remove her name from the minutes. So I'll move that amendment and move approval of the minutes as amended.
can I have someone second that? Or do we need a minute to look over it?
Sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
I just need to have someone like second Jane's
Oh, I'll second it.
motion. Okay. Matt,
So yeah, I think just all in favor.
yeah, all in favor?
Aye.
Y'all know these dances like I know the living bejesus out of me, so whatever we need to do. All in favor, say aye.
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 All right. All right, our next thing is just opening up for public comment. Do we have anybody who's here to make public comment?
Well, I would say something, and I hope that I have never done this before, but I have been reading about what you're thinking about doing, and if I understand it right, buildings that are now more than single family homes, that I guess there are people that are going in and turning them into single family homes. So there had been 2 units or 3 units in a building, and now they're being turned into 1 family units. Do I have that right?
Yeah, that's the definition of deconversion, at least at that level.
So I understand there are many 2 flats. Like I've lived in Evanston for decades, and I walk around and I see 2 flats, and I guess I don't have a problem with saying that buildings that were built originally as 2 flats, for them to be converted into a single family home seems wrong. I mean, it really is taking away housing units for people. But houses that were originally single family houses and were turned into 2 flats, in the 1920s or something like that, or even 3 flats, and now they're being told that those houses cannot be, that if I understand it right, that those houses then could not be turned back into single family homes. That feels different to me than a house that a building that was originally a 2-flat and having that turned into a single family home. I'm sorry, I'm not being very clear.
No,
But
you're being clear.
it feels different to me. And you know, I'm nobody, so it doesn't matter what I
No,
say. But
you're a resident, so don't say you're nobody.
well, and I guess I find this, you know, it's an issue near and dear to me. I live in a house that was built in the 1880s as a single family home. In the 1920s, it was turned into a 2-flat. In the 1980s, it was turned into a 3-flat. We bought it in 1990 and it turned it back to a 2-flat. And at some point I'll sell it. I mean, I'm old and going up and down all the stairs is killing me. But I would feel bad if I couldn't say, well, you know, a potential owner could turn it back into a single family home. And I guess if this happens, then I would not be able to say that. If it originally had been a 2-family home, then I have no problem being able to say, you can't turn this into a single family home. But it feels like there should be 2 different categories for that.
Okay.
That's just my personal opinion.
Thank you. I have a question for you just to clarify. When you said you would feel bad if you can't say that they could turn it into a single family home, could you just help me understand that?
Sure.
You know, for somebody
Sure.
moving on, like help me understand the bad feelings around not being able to, the future person not being able to use it that way.
I guess the way our house is now, you know, as the owner, I live on the 2nd and 3rd floor with my family, and I rent out the 1st floor, and that's great. But I think it takes a certain person to be willing to be a homeowner and also be a landlord. You know, you get called in the middle of the night, Deb, the toilet's overflowing. Okay, I'm coming down with my, you know, plunger. And, you know, certain people don't want to have anything to do with that. So I would hate if I ever chose to sell the house. I'm sure at some point in the next 100 years, I will do that. I would hate to limit who would be interested in buying this house, that it would have to be someone like me who doesn't mind being a landlord and a homeowner. You know, do you understand at all what I'm trying to say? That it would limit, you know, people might want to say, oh, that would be a great house. It's, you know, it's in a neighborhood where it's all single family homes. We'd like to turn that back into a single family home. I wouldn't want to say, oh, sorry, can't do that. You know, it can only
So
be.
you have a larger sales market or market
Yeah.
demand. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm just trying to understand this from
No,
and again,
totally
I'm
appreciate
a
it.
realtor. I understand that from a real estate perspective. I understand that from a financial perspective. I was just trying to make sure we understood fully the equity argument being made. So thank you.
Thank you for clarifying.
Okay. Anybody else? You had a comment? Okay. Matt, were you going to go over I mean, I don't know that we need to go over every single one of these. I actually am going to talk about a few of them as we get into the anti-gentrification ordinances, but we do have a couple of updates on the community equity survey, which is now closed. Matt?
Yeah, I'm happy to give a little update. I put together a little something that just to kind of get you all up to date on most of the questions that I have data for. So maybe I can run through that quickly, and if there's a point where you want to stop or talk about something more, we can do that. But
No, if you have something prepared, keep going. I didn't want to overburden you, but if you have something prepared, go on.
I'm going to see if I can. So you all should be looking at the, so if I do this, are you all looking at the presentation, or are you looking at the presenter view?
We're seeing the presenter view, I think.
Okay.
The presenter seats behind it. Now we see it.
Got it.
It's off center though, so if you want to full screen it.
Perfect. Sorry. Now you all are seeing how messy my home screen is.
It's all right. If you see mine, we're
Kindred spirit. Great. So since the last time we talked, there were over 120 new responses. So I think that was good and worthwhile to keep it open. And just a brief note on the statistical validity of this survey. We have just about over double the amount that we would need to be statistically valid for the population of Evanston. But the challenge is that we missed a couple of the targets as far as representativeness across different metrics. With that said, I think the results of the survey should be viewed as informative, and you all can have a reasonable amount of confidence that the survey captures the general perspective of residents in the city of Evanston. So for the first one, ending racial inequity is the responsibility of government. About 70% of respondents either agree or strongly agree, with the rest of residents dispersed between the rest. And then to address inequity, resources must be allocated based on need, not always equally allocated. And so this was even more strongly agreed with. Approximately 80% of residents agreed or strongly agreed with the remaining 20% in the other areas. And then how confident are you in the Evanston Police Department's ability to treat BIPOC and white people equally? And this one, it's pretty significant, with approximately 52% of people having a great deal or a fair amount of confidence, but also 48% which means 48% of people have little or no confidence in the police department's ability to treat people equally. And then have you or someone in your family moved out of Evanston in the past 3 years due to the cost of housing? And this shows that 17% of responses are yes and 82% no. I would still say 17% is a significant number. And here I did something a little bit wacky, so bear with me as I try to explain. So I know this isn't the most beautiful, but I think it adds some interesting context to this question. So this table shows that approximately 40% of the Black or African American respondents said that they have a family member who has moved out of the city due to the cost of housing, and 32% of Hispanic or Latinx respondents said that they know someone or have a family member who's moved out of Evanston for lack of or because of the cost of housing, compared to 9.4% of white people who responded to this survey having known someone who moved out of the town because of the cost of housing. Moving on to question 5, the city of Evanston is responsible for strategically planning for and providing affordable and mixed income housing. This is similar to the other kind of broad questions, with 70% of the respondents saying that approximately 70% saying they agree or strongly agree, and the remaining 30% kind of being evenly dispersed. And then how likely is it that you'll be able to afford to live in Evanston in the next 5 years? And this one, we can see that about 21% of respondents said that they don't think that they'll be able to, or that's not very likely or highly unlikely that they'll be able to afford to live in Evanston in the next 5 years, and that an additional 12% say that they don't know, which I think is also a concerning number, a similar level of stress, I would say. And then how significant of a racial equity problem are these issues for your household? And this shows that for people's lived experience, the most common problem was racial inequities in the schools. And following closely behind that were healthcare access, police treatment of BIPOC communities, and disproportionate city resource allocation. And then question 8, how significantly of a racial equity problem are these issues in Evanston for the larger community? So at the proportion level, housing affordability jumps to the top. And then with racial inequities in schools and the police treatment of BIPOC communities kind of close behind. And then of the equity issues above, which do you consider the community of Evanston's most important issue? And you can see that it is pretty heavily leaning towards housing affordability, with racial inequities in schools also being an outlier. Question 12, how would you rate the city of Evanston's commitment to racial justice and equity? And this was a pretty mixed response, but approximately 48% of respondents said that it was either good or fair. And this is just the same data in a table. And then here, question 15, are there any racial justice initiatives undertaken by the city of Evanston in the last 3 years that have been successful? And I think the responses in this table are relevant and important, but you can also see right under the question that 202 people skipped this question, which to me means that they don't think that, or they can't think of any initiatives that have been successful, which means approximately 30% of the people who responded to this survey don't think that there was a successful initiative. Jane, do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. I'm also really curious about what the other would be.
Yeah, and I can, sorry. I can try and find a way to share that information. I'm sorry if you can hear someone's in my house, so I'm a little bit flustered.
Were they able to add?
Yeah, so
Oh, so you do have data on what the other is?
Right, we have the data, but it's not in a way that I thought could be easily presented.
Great, thank you for sharing if you can.
Yeah, I'll share after this. I'll share all the raw data with Carla, and she can share it as she sees fit, because it comes in an Excel spreadsheet, which isn't easy to digest unless you have kind of software to do it. So question 16. So for these questions, it's kind of a rating scale. 3 being neutral, 5 being strong towards the phrase on the right, and 1 being strong towards phrase on the left. And this shows that kind of the average score given to this was a 3, leaning a little bit towards welcoming. And here, in between racist and anti-racist, respondents rated it on average about a 3. Between segregated and integrated, respondents were rated it on average about a 2, which is one of the strongest deviations from the middle throughout all of these questions. Between individualistic and collaborative, it was basically right in the middle. Between homophobic and pro all sexual orientations, you can see kind of a strong positive tendency in respondents, and that was also one of the strongest deviations from the middle. Between transphobic and pro all gender identities, it's similar to the previous question, just slightly fewer positive responses. Between unwelcoming and inclusive, it's about in the middle, so an average response of 3 on this scale. Between elitist and non-elitist, this is another one of the strongest deviations towards elitist. And then between not disability friendly and disability friendly, it's about right down the middle. And then moving on to question 26, over the past 12 months, how many times have you or a member of your family experienced discriminatory events in Evanston? What aspect of your identity did the discrimination pertain to? We can see that racial or ethnic identity was one of the most common, or was the most common that respondents noted, and also socioeconomic status was another common response, and sex was the other kind of pretty common response. And then over the past 12 months, how many times have you witnessed others experience discriminatory events? And kind of clearly from the last slide, you can see that people see it happen more often than they experience it, which I think we would expect. But the kind of top trends are the same. Racial or ethnic identity and socioeconomic status are the kind of far outliers in this section. And before I do questions, I'm just going to have one conclusion, which that I think that this survey provides a pretty strong mandate for this commission to do work on affordable housing in the city in general, to work in that area.
Thank you, Matt.
Yeah, and I can leave the slides up if you all want, or I can we can go back to the other screen as long as there's no slides that people want to see.
Any questions before we talk about next steps on this?
Would you be willing to show question 11 again, please,
Yeah.
Matt?
No problem. Okay, 12. Because there was not a question. There's a question 11 on the survey, but as Jane was asking about the different data, if it was like a section where people were typing, I didn't include that in this report because it's really hard to communicate that data basically. So was it question 12 that you were interested in?
I was trying to take some notes, and so I assume it must have been, yeah, it must have been question 12.
And so this was on how would you rate the city of Evanston's commitment? And it's about 50% people say good or very good, and then I think it's about another 20% or 27% that say it's fair, and then the remaining.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And so next steps around this is that the commission made a commitment. Well, I should start with, our purpose of this was to create a baseline, right? You don't know what you have to fix or where you're going if you don't know where you are. And, I guess I'll say I feel better now than when I felt after the first wave of 300 came in, where not as many people thought that things like affordable housing was a community or government responsibility. So I'm glad to see that is a higher majority now, but it is also this commission's responsibility to create a report that can be disseminated across the community, because we're not going to have a chance to present in this presentation format. So it needs to be something that's kind of a, I would say no more than 3 pages readable summary of what this is. And so I'll treat this like we treat kind of the subcommittees we just had for the affordable housing stuff. If they're folks who are either have this skill set or willing to be part of the group that breaks this up to try to, create a short report, please, message me, let me know, or just let me know right now. And we'll do another subcommittee that's, focused on, everybody would have 3 questions or 4 questions, and you would kind of write the section on that once we have an overall agreement of sort of the tone of everything, so that, each section matches, so to speak. So if you're interested in helping with that, please let me know. Any other questions before we move on?
So Carla, I raised my hand, not to volunteer
sorry.
for this, but just thinking that the city has communications professionals who can help develop infographics, create then this whatever we're looking at doing here, the report, and can help make it understandable to folks and share it. So Matt, thank you for helping us understand that this is statistically
It's close, basically. I would
yeah,
I
it's
think that
significant.
it's relevant. I'm not an expert in surveys. I think you may be, but I just did some research today about what is required as far as sample size for a population the size of Evanston to be statistically valid, and
Sure.
we have far past that.
Thanks for prefacing your presentation with that, but it needs to be shared, and I think it can be shared through city channels. So,
And I think I definitely would utilize the city to make it pretty and create the infographics and things like that. I don't want to have somebody without an equity lens. How to put this?
Curating this.
Yeah, curating it, right? There's something we want people to walk away with from this, and so I'm happy to have somebody make it pretty, but at the very least, we need to be providing, the key takeaways and something about what this is telling us.
Right.
And then they can, edit the beaches inside of it and make it look professional and stuff like that. So thanks for the reminder on that, because that's the piece that is most annoying to me. So happy to pass that off.
Let's use professionals for that.
Yeah.
I'm happy to help then with the core messaging.
Okay, perfect. All right, so the next thing on our agenda, we're going to pick back up the conversation of the anti-gentrification ordinance, as it's being called. I am going to share my screen. All right, share screen. All right, whoopsie daisy, I just moved that. It's not what I'm meaning to do. And let me just get it in presentation mode. Oops. That's just where I needed to be. All right, so just a reminder of where we're at for anybody who wasn't here last time, and just kind of understanding of what our commission is and what non-power we wield. we started with the survey that we created, I don't know, months ago at this point. COVID is a blur. With the knowledge that affordable housing was an issue already being mentioned a lot at city council, to all the folks, knowing that that was going to bubble up to the top or to the top of the list when we did this survey. And so one of our meetings, we kind of said, let's go out and start researching what is out there. What are other communities doing? What are the possibilities around affordable? And I said affordable and moderate housing to help provide more inventory and to ease the struggles. This was probably early in COVID, which is the time where everybody was kind of literally stuck in their house and we weren't seeing the housing crisis as bad as it is. So fast forward probably at least a year and a half since that initial conversation, we're in even more dire straits. And so as a commission, we are working to create what is shaping up to be 5 different ordinance suggestions. Some are in ordinance, some in resolution, some is making a change to an existing ordinance, and we'll get to all of that. With the understanding that we don't wield the power to actually vote on any of this. So, I just like to mention that. So just kind of reviewing, I'm not reviewing everything Matt did, but the things that are pertinent to this is just kind of pointing out again that when we ask people what's the most important racial equity issue for our community, affordable housing comes out far and beyond anything else, close to 50%. And then when we try to figure out what's people's second most important issue to folks, there's another 22 something like that % here. So what we were expecting to happen is at the top of mind and a critical issue for our community. And this is when we ask the question of personally, is affordable, what are the racial equity issues for you or equity issues for you? And then we ask what about the larger community. And again, so it's a different way of getting at this question. We see that affordable housing is coming out. So I just kind of wanted to preface that. I do want to back up and talk. I see Bill's here, so kind of talking to Bill, but this is a lesson not just to Bill and to Evanston now. This is a lesson to all of Evanston and how, how we maintain and replicate and reify white supremacy without even using racial words. So after our last meeting, we were 2 articles written about what we're hoping to do and what we're hoping to accomplish with one path towards easing the affordable housing issues in Evanston. And a comment was made here that, we only had anecdotal evidence, even as we brought a community member and older person of Chicago community where this has been done and has been easing the pressures around and has dropped the number of deconversions. And then there were a lot of comments about how, but this idea that this is anecdotal, even as I stand here as a volunteer, yes, but also as a realtor, as a developer in our community, and as a member of the community that's most affected by this. And, this is what we call lived experience. So while America, why we want to say that anecdotal evidence doesn't get us anywhere and that we want data, I want to kind of remind us that lived experience for the people on the ground in the community actually facing it counts for a lot, not to mention my other qualifications. But I also want to get to the point of data, right? So that's another tool. We want data. We want to see the data. We don't believe in lived experiences. And so we get another article that says 2 flat deconversion averages only 2 per year, with lovely comments by folks who, don't post their names. That basically there's no problem here, nothing to see. Folks are just making stuff up. We don't even have an issue. But that's the funny thing about data, though. Data will show you exactly what you want to see. You'll twist it the way you want to twist it to see what you want to twist it to. And the other thing that's coming up here, it reminds me of the difference between equity and things like charity and equality. When I go back to the data and the survey, we had a 40%, 45% of people who said that equity is a priority for the city. And I would argue that Evanston is still in its charity/equality. Our quote unquote reparations program. It takes money from money from people buying weed and turns it into a program that gives to somebody else. And the way we view that, nothing is taken away from any other citizen. And so it doesn't hurt anybody else. It's like giving a little bit of charity, right? Yes, you gave something, but it didn't change for you. Or equality, allowing other people to get married. Okay, great, we gave something, but it didn't touch us. It didn't hurt us. This is the difference between making systemic change when resources are limited. So what we are proposing around, and I'm going to stop calling it deconversion, I'm going to start calling it maintaining the unit count. People start having to make sacrifices, right? It starts to affect certain people. And I want to repeat that equity is usually used when resources are limited. There's only so much housing in Evanston, right? Resources are limited. We can't just build a ton more. We don't have a bunch of land. So we have to make best and maximize what we have. And that may make limitations for some in order to create a need and create affordable and moderate housing for others. And that's where Evanston gets stuck repeatedly, time and time again, the minute it means making any sacrifices for ourselves. So back to the data that folks like. We might want to say that even though the last 3 years, there's not been a whole lot of anything with COVID, but that it's only 2 a year. But this is the reality. The second ward is where this is happening. 44% of these deconversions are happening in the second ward. Another 16% in the fourth ward, and another 9% in the sixth ward. Another 16% in the ninth ward. Also worth noting is that the first ward, 0%, sixth ward, 0%, seventh ward only had one or two, can't remember, or third ward only had one. Some people, back to lived experience, are witnessing this, realizing this, living with this on their block, living with this in their community, while others get to not live with it. And hence they can say it's not happening or it's not a big deal. I want to also point out that while 44% of these deconversions in the foyer that was made happened in the second ward, 32, almost a third of all of them happened on Florence and Dewey alone. So back to that lived experience, I live on Florence. Dewey is right next to Florence. And in the second ward, there's a 4-block radius between Florence, Dewey, Darrow, and then Dodge. Every single one of these deconversions took place in that floor block with distance east-west. So it's not even happening across the whole second ward, it's happening in certain patches. Similarly, the fourth ward was relatively heavily hit, as well as the ninth ward. But I racialize everything. This is, after all, a racial equity commission. And so this is a map of Evanston that shows us the racial equity distribution. I'm going to be silent for a second and let everybody take in the red dots. Oh, I can't see it at the bottom of the mine. I don't know if I cut off the, but I'll help you out. The red dots are white folks, white households. The blue dots are Black households. Obviously, there's Asian and Hispanic and other things in there as well, but that's what's mostly hopping out at you. I give everybody a minute to digest, and then we can talk about why this is happening in the second ward and the fourth ward and the ninth ward. Oh. So I'm going to give you my version. My version's not the gospel truth, but it's a version. This, one of the comments on the Evanston Now and the folks who refuse to always put their names in there, cowardly, but that's a different story, said that, oh, maybe this is happening somewhere close to Howard. Again, not our problem if it's all the way down there, close to where we don't want to own as Evanston or recognize on our own, but it's not happening in Evanston. And I challenge that conception, because this is not happening in our community where there's the most affordable housing or the cheapest buildings to buy to then convert. This is happening in our community where there is a mix of moderate housing to buy and proximity to whiteness. When I said that it's happening here in the second ward, which is like the center of the second ward, not over here in the second ward, not super east in the second ward, which is mainly converted already. It's happening in the spots that has the mix of where you can get folks to pay the $1 million for the home, and you can still buy something for 300-400 and then convert it and sell it for 1 something million. So in these communities where there's a mix of red dots and blue dots, that's where it's happening. Now, we want to look back at the history and say in the last 13 years, it's only 2 per. And again, it's not happening up here in the 6th ward. It's not happening very much. It's not happening at all in the 1st ward. It's not happening really. There's 1, I think, in the 3rd ward. But we just had a decision made by our school community to put a new school in the 5th ward. We've already heard from residents that they've amped up, which is what prompted this whole, the first part of this anti-gentrification, the first ordinance on there. The calls that folks were already receiving have amped up in anticipation of developers and investors that community will also then gentrify. And so if we want to look back, I don't know, I'm not always, I believe the history should tell us how to act in the future. This is about what's about to happen here in Evanston. And with that idea that the bright, shiny new school in the 5th ward is going to breed gentrification, what we need to be looking at is how can we stop what we know is happening in those places that have proximity to whiteness. And I want you to show you here with the 5th ward, closest to downtown, closest to the 1st ward, again, extremely white, closest to the 7th ward, again, extremely white, closest to the 6th ward, what we know about what happened in 2, 4, and 9, and what we can presume is likely to happen with the 5th ward, as there are other engines that are going to produce and expedite gentrification in those neighborhoods. So anybody who wants to stay looking backward, great, but I'm about to look at what we can, I want us to look at what we can prevent from happening based on what we know has happened in the past. So with that being said, we already have the language. We've had 2 subcommittees that met. We have the language completed on this first piece. I don't believe that, there's any reason this moving forward to first the planning. We figured out the paths for each one of these, the planning and development. The planning and development group or commission, I can't remember what they call them. And then through to council. And this is just focusing on the anti-predatory language of, within a 180-day period, there's only so many contacts can be made by a phone, email, etc., to any resident asking them about the sale of their house, or if they're interested in selling their house. And I think we've covered this a lot, so I don't want to kind of spend too much time on that. There are 4 other recommendations that rose up from these subcommittees and in discussion with all the persons. One, we've discussed, and we're going to call it maintaining the unit count of any building under 4 units. I want to thank the member of the community who talked about homes that were previously homes that were turned into 2 flats. Where you said it was your understanding wouldn't be allowed. There was actually no discussion of that before. So thank you for bringing that to our, attention. And we'll do, we'll figure out where those lie. I have to go investigate and see, are those under has the zoning of that changed, or what happens in that case? So thanks for bringing that to attention. But there was no clear, understanding of that before. There's also questions that have come to me about what happens to conversions of large condo buildings. We are not talking about large condo buildings. We're talking about 2 flats. 3 flats, 4 flats. And the reason here is it is almost impossible for a family who is renting, who cannot afford to buy a house or to rent a large house, to find housing in our neighborhoods that are not like downtown, right? That's where the housing, if you think about the west end of the 4th ward, center end, I guess. Oh no, west end of the 4th, center of the 2nd, based on the way those are situated. Those communities that are, walkable neighborhoods, have parks, etc., that have that suburban feel that folks like, right? It is almost impossible to find rentals. in those in that area. And that's what we're trying to conserve, not necessarily stop somebody who's already in a large building with multiple units who buy it. If they buy it and want to convert it or whatever, they might change 1 bedrooms into 3 bedrooms, or that's not our focus. Not saying there's not a problem there. That's just not what we're addressing. So units under 4, and we have spoken to 2 alderpersons. One of the alderperson, Reed, was on our in our small group committee, discussing and helping draft these. And he's had conversations with others. And we have been able to identify where in the current ordinance we would be looking to modify that. And that would also go through the Planning and Development Committee. Something else that came up was related to the ADU, the recent ADU ordinance. And this is kind of looking at what has happened in Madison, in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, I believe in Sacramento, around ADUs. So cities have gone out there, they have made it okay to add an ADU, which, we were originally talking about how do we make sure that if somebody who owned a single family home had the option to add units. We've reviewed the ADU ordinance, and given that it allows ADUs to be attached, detached, part of the garage, it pretty much covers. So already, if somebody has a single family home under that ordinance that passed about a year and something ago, essentially they already have the ability to add another unit. So we didn't have to do anything with that. But like all these other communities that have had it for 5 to 7 years, it isn't something that many people can utilize. Couple other factors around having to have a separate water source and things like that, and not being able to tap off the one for the house, but also access to funds to be able to do it. And so several communities have considered doing low interest loans to help promote families creating these ADUs. But again, once money comes from the city in any way, even if it's in a form of a loan, then we can make demands, for lack of a better word, on what is done with that property. And what we don't want is folks taking the low interest loans and then creating Airbnbs and having it be, which Airbnbs is a way to afford a home, right? So it's not but the goal of this loan is to provide affordable housing, not necessarily to to make folks make money off of Airbnbs. So there would be some sort of rule in there that it'd be 5 to 10 years that they have to rent it as a long-term rental versus, and then, they can do what they want to do with it after that. And that would happen via a resolution that would be aimed at the budget when the budget is being made. And then we talked about raising the fine for demolition and demolishing houses. We found out that while in most places it's actually set to be 10,000, there was something ruled in 2012 that added inflation to it. So it's actually up to 19,000 right now. This is one that I can actually say doesn't happen a whole lot as a real estate agent who watches every house in the neighborhood when they go up and down. But it is money that goes directly into the Affordable Housing Fund. So while it's not, again, no one silver bullet is going to fix this, which is why we're attacking, attempting to attack it from multiple different angles that we've seen other communities do with success. But raising that fine, so that might happen once or twice a year, but it does give us a little extra in the affordable housing. And again, that's just an alteration to the current existing ordinance that would then still have the inflation tacked onto it that'll continue to rise, so we don't have to make the adjustment as often. And then the final thing that came up was presently in high rises, if whatever the affordable housing proportion is decided, that only has to last, it only has to be affordable housing units for 30 years. And the recommendation was to make those into perpetuity in our, in our land use ordinance around that, so that we keep building on our affordable housing stock as opposed to some rolling off because it's retired at the 30 years and some more rolling on, and we're constantly chasing. We're not really building up a stock from that perspective. So I'm gonna stop sharing. Oops. There we go. I see hands. Oh, there's Devon's hand. I can make room for questions and reshare anything that anybody wants to see. Devon, was your hand meaning to be up?
It was up earlier, but you know, you did such a great job. My hand is now down. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. Sorry, I was not looking at the people. I was looking at my screen. So.
Oh yeah, no problem.
I see Lashandra. So I'm seeing some questions now. I see, I'm going all the way back. Please email Matt with what you are the biggest takeaways from the survey. Okay, that was not there. Trisha, I see the piece about Airbnb and not owning, and I'm gonna add, Matt, how can we find out? Because it's not just how many Airbnbs, right? Because we could probably go online and figure it out, but how many investor Airbnbs there are, meaning you don't live there.
In part, what you could do to try to piece that together, sorry to jump in, Matt,
No.
is to look at one, as you said, go online and look at the B&Bs that are listed, and then also separately to then look up those addresses on the Cities About My Place tool. And right in that tool, you can click right over to the county assessor's office, or to the county, assessor's office, and you can see who the owner is. And, you know, typically if it's almost always, if it's an investment property, it's under some LLC or some other, business type.
Yeah. I mean, not always.
Not always. I mean,
that's one way to figure it out. I mean, and I think, so just for anybody who haven't been following what has been happening in other communities, Atlanta as a city just created a ban or a new rule that says, not a ban per se, but you can only have 2 Airbnbs in Atlanta. So again, we are a capitalist country. Like, what we're trying to prevent is the Uber capitalism, right? And so a person can Airbnb their own house and they can have one other, but they must live in Atlanta. So what they're saying is that if somebody's going to make money off of people visiting Atlanta, it better be people from our own community versus folks dropping and buying 30 units in this is happening a lot in Houston too, 30 units in a new building and using it as a hotel practically because it's next to the convention center, right? And that money's going elsewhere. There is a required license for having an Airbnb. But we could preeminently do that. I don't know, we know the details behind there's a problem, but I think that's worth looking into before we chasing the problem from behind. Jane?
So I think the implication is that even though we have a license, maybe it's a licensing or registration requirement for short-term rentals. So it's probably 10 years old now. I don't know if, I guess we're all assuming that most people who offer these short-term rentals, Airbnb or VBRO, whatever it is, do not register or license themselves with the city of Evanston. So you have to go onto those sites to figure out what the universe is of properties that are now short-term rentals. But the city should have data on at least
the question here though is
that they've issued or registrations. I can't remember what the ordinance requires.
The specific question here that was around owner occupied. So I Airbnb my place.
The ordinance,
but I occupy it most of the time. It gets rented
the
twice a year or
ordinance
something.
has some requirements. The ordinance speaks to that, as I recall. So it's worth maybe, I'll see if I can pull it up and share with us about, it's good to understand what it is. And if it requires owner occupancy, then
I think the owner occupancy is, if I remember correctly, is that I know there's a bed and breakfast ordinance, and that I know that was coming up during the not Harley Clark, around Major Pritzker.
This is different, and it's a short-term rental, so it was targeted to Airbnb and VBRO rental units. Let me see if I can find the link and
Okay.
share it.
Yeah,
But
that was a good question, Trisha. And I want to thank Trisha, who's not a commissioner who participated in one of our sub groups. So I just want to say a shout out now as I are thinking about it. And so that is something we can look into. Again, want to try to understand how much is this happening, and do we think there's any potential, anything that's going to make this an issue, even if it's not a huge issue right now. We talked about the demolition fee that's hovering around 19,000 right now. I don't, and then the next question here from Lashandra, could there be any benefits for demolishing homes to build affordable multi-unit rentals? I know that unless the city is giving loans of some sort or providing money in any way, or tax, I mean, they can't do tax benefit because that's county, but if they're providing money in any way, then they can dictate, the pricing of the houses. If it's just an individual, I don't know that we have any program right now, correct me if I'm wrong, because Devon and I talked about this, that is targeted to incentivizing developers to build affordable housing.
Yeah, I think I'm reading the question now, but I think the question here is, can there be benefits for those who are demolishing homes to build affordable multi-units? And the answer to that is, Lysandra, absolutely yes, there could be. We could, for example, reduce or eliminate the demolition fee and say, hey, if you are, if you promise, or, if you make some, you make a claim that you're building affordable housing, we will waive these fees, and we could certainly, put in some clawbacks and some penalties if they were to not agree, if they're not to follow through on that. But yes, we could provide some kind of benefit or incentive, and we could go beyond just eliminating the demolition fee. There's always potential for TIF dollars and other, dollars to supplement that.
Yeah, and I think we'd have to go, I mean, again, as somebody who knows the cost of building, $35,000 in no way is going to make up for the reduced rent that somebody would be thinking of as they look at their return on investment, given the cost. And so we'd have to, we'd have to investigate something, significantly larger than that, because it just, especially today. I mean, I think before COVID and right now and rental prices, it's outrageous. And so, I mean, Jane, sorry, is your hands up again, or was it from a previous question?
I have found an ordinance where the city licenses vacation rentals, which are rentals for less than 30 days. I think that's the short-term rental ordinance. I don't have time to read through it right now during the meeting, but I'll share the link.
Yeah, that sounds exactly right.
Is that right? Yeah.
That sounds like that would be exactly the ordinance that deals with that.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll look at ownership around that. So thanks for bringing that up. So Devon, I don't know if you want to chat with us about, I mean, I did all the talking. I met with Trisha on this, and then Omar and Devon. So Trisha, Omar, anybody else want to kind of comment anything or add to anything I said on this before we move on?
No, thank you so much for sharing the presentation. That was really eye-opening.
Yeah, well, one thing I'll add, when my hand was up earlier, was to say, I think based on some conversations that I've had with at least one of my colleagues, I think particularly on the, which to me seems like a no-brainer, the anti-discrimination ordinance, it might be helpful if we can get just a bit of data or statistics or something, to help make the case locally a bit more, because that was frustratingly one of the things that one of my colleagues brought up.
Back to the show me the data. And we did have a conversation about really any data around that is anecdotal, right? Like whether you like it or not, it's going to be, quotes from a resident who talks about their experience. And so, which as we literally are experiencing from our last meeting, nobody likes anecdotal information, even though it's a lived experience of people who are receiving the calls. So I think we could do something about trying to get some of those. Darlene, I'll probably chat with you about how we could do some outreach to to get some statements. But again, there's nothing in the city collecting data on that. So and also I always feel like the pushback here is when the effort is literally not harming anybody. This constant cry for data, it's part of white culture. But anyway, when the harm is being expressed and literally it's not.
Ironically, us passing this would actually create data on this that would allow us to analyze when folks are violating. That would create, if reported, a ping point for the city to actually collect data. So,
All right, Katie.
I just want to say real quick, I missed last meeting, but so I want to just say a note of appreciation to the folks who've worked on this over the last month, and Carla for what you pulled together. That was just great to see, and I support everything on that list. It seems very needed. So thank you all.
Yeah. Thanks. And so the key thing is here that we're waiting on I guess we're just aligning our timing on this. As you noticed, each one of these, there's some places where we're just adding something and we'll write its own ordinance. The other places where it exists, like the price changes, and we would have to, it's just an amendment. So we literally have like a paragraph and saying, take out this and put in this kind of thing. And then there's some others like the loan stuff that it would be, through a budget resolution, which is different. And so Devon was very helpful in kind of trying to pinpoint exactly where the home of all of these things, so we understand where we would be and finding the exact paragraph we'd be working with. I don't know who's Devon, you're on city council. What is I assume is nobody's voting on anything until the second ward person is chosen?
oh no, we're voting on all kinds of stuff, even without them.
Okay.
Lost to the second ward, but yeah.
Yes, lost to the second ward. But I think it's also only fair that that we're saying most impacts the second ward. But I guess that was my thinking originally, that we're trying to kind of get this together to ensure that we think we have good odds talking to all the persons, and then we think we have good odds by the time the last of the older folks is put into position. So so yeah, that's kind of what I was originally targeting time-wise on this. Any other questions? Oh, go ahead, Jane. I missed your real hand because you're normally so good about putting up the other hand.
I try. Thank you. I'm just thinking that the data on the existing conditions, we're going to want to have, because it helps us with the baseline to also measure the impact. So if these ordinances are enacted, the ordinance on both if the ordinances are enacted, we're going to want to know the existing conditions so that we can measure impact and measurable outcomes. And so I want us to understand the data, obviously, of the existing conditions, but also use it for what comes later and to show how this is going to make a difference in the second ward, in the fourth ward.
Yeah. And I just want to make clear that I literally used to teach statistics in project management for a living, right? So I'm not an anti-data person.
Neither am I.
The key thing here is that in something that is, a phone call, or we're never going to track. I literally know someone right now who is building a house where they address the person, they call them and talk to them for like 9 months straight, kept visiting until they bought it. Right? In a market that was changing so rapidly, I know they bought it on the market because I know what they bought it for. It's on the market, right? we will never be able to track that information, right?
Information, right?
Right?
There's-
We can't go back into that house in its new $1 million, $1 million state and figure out what it would have been worth in September of whatever. So there's certain things, given the effort to write the ordinance and, the little harm that's being done to anybody besides the bird dog and the developer, that in my mind is not worth running down data when, or spending an enormous amount of time. Getting a few, anecdotes from the folks, great, right? But like,
Yeah.
that is.
But it's also good to know that the city has a whole lot of managers who have access to this data, and the city is one of the, in the world of municipalities, is one of the best at actually developing the data, presenting the data, offering the data, and so it's there for us to
And
use.
so some of these other things we will, like the
These
high
other
rise.
things are harder to reach because they're not within the city's control, but
Yeah.
if there's
So the
any
high
data
rise stuff.
within the city's control, Matthew, help us, we have access to it all.
Yeah. So things like the high rise, and if we make that change, we should then have things not dropping off. So again, it'd probably only be stuff going forward, but we would see that instead of staying somewhat steady or slightly going, it goes up because nothing's dropping off. So there are pieces here we can easily find data for. Running down the data has to be worth the benefit, or explaining the labor, and in this case that first one, there's very little labor. So
I think it's easier than we imagine because this city has people who can do this. It's a matter of figuring out where the ask is. Great.
Okay.
Great.
All right. I would love to get us in a place. There's one other thing we were going to discuss. Matt had originally have it on the schedule, and I didn't think we'd have enough time, and it wouldn't be enough time to kind of start into that, but we do need to wrap up our equity scorecard. Now that we actually have a city manager, hopefully, we can, introduce that at both to the council and the city manager. And in a perfect world, which we don't live in a perfect world, in a perfect world, these groups would be doing it. We designed it the way we designed it for us to do it, because the reality is what the reality is about the equity knowledge in those groups, right? But at the very least, I think in the best of cases in this situation is that we explain to both those groups what this is. There is a level of interest, and they say, oh, there's this upcoming change. Can we? And so they're actually, what's the word I'm looking for? Assigning us something, because in my mind, if somebody asks for something, they're more likely to pay attention to it. We just go on our own time and just do it, and we turn it in. People, I didn't ask for this. Why are you giving it to me, right? And so the best of, to me, situations in based on how it's designed is that we introduce it and we get assigned things, because there's some true interest in understanding if they can get, more equity, like they can get better at that particular policy change or introduction or whatever it is. Jane?
Carlo, one thing, and I'm sorry, just yesterday, and I'm sorry I haven't reached out to call you, and it's probably just coincidental. I met in my office at work a guy named Adam Slade, who used to be at the Metropolitan Planning Council. He's now pursuing his PhD in public administration, but also working as a consultant, shared with me that he's been commissioned to work with the city of Evanston on their equity scorecard. So I don't know if Adam and I were talking about the same thing, that is the scorecard that maybe Matthew can share. So.
Right. Yeah, I can clear that up a little bit.
Thank you.
So
I didn't know if Adam and I were talking
That'd
about
be
the
really
same thing.
confusing. I can imagine that being confusing. So he is working on the public engagement plan for the city. You all may remember from maybe last meeting or a couple meetings back, we were talking about with the environment board, members of the environment board, about kind of developing a public engagement plan and who is responsible for that based on the environmental justice resolution. which names the Equity and Empowerment Commission as kind of to consult. So Adam is working on the participatory, or not participatory budget. I've got participatory budgeting on my brain. He's working on the public engagement plan and process for the city. And my understanding is that part of that is a scoring mechanism to score basically how the city has done on its public engagement from an equity lens. So I was initially hoping that he would be ready to come to this meeting, at which point I would have said that, all right, tried to get that on the agenda. But I think at the next meeting, hopefully next commission meeting, he will have his public engagement plan developed to the point where it's ready for the commission to consult on it.
Okay.
Thank you for the clarification. I'd really like to understand, if you can add him to the agenda for our next meeting, understand what his role is and be helpful.
And if I understand you right, Matt, that's his focus is no matter what we're doing, making sure we're getting the public engagement in that, whether it's the hiring, whether it's whatever changes we're making. And he wants to make sure that's done with an equity lens, which is different than applying an equity lens across the board to all the decisions made. But I would be interested in even like a one-on-one meeting with him to understand what his model looks like what the format looks like, because if that's already something that the city is paying for to do, and we can sort of line up the models, right? The data is different, then there is some learning there, because the city, people using it in the city are already using and used to that format. You know, changing the format is not a big deal, even if we have the content already made for our scorecard. So I'd be interested in chatting with him if you could introduce us.
Yeah, and I think the hope is that everything is aligned.
Yeah. All right. With 12 minutes left, I am happy to give folks that time back to their day. I am actually in a hotel and my family is somewhere outside pacing because I told them they can't be in here. So I'd love those 12 minutes back to my life.
Are you on vacation?
Sort of, kind of, maybe.
Oh, Carla, thank you for dialing in for this meeting on your vacation.
It's all good. There's never any vacation in my life.
Thanks to your family.
People with kids just take care of the kids elsewhere, right?
Absolutely.
It's not really vacation.
Their vacation is typically not the parents.
All right. Anything else before I call for? I would just kind of reminder back to the first thing we discussed. If anyone is willing to take 3 or 4, well, meet as a group, figure out what the tone and what are the key things we're trying to highlight, and then be responsible for putting the responses or the reality of the responses or what we're supposed to take from it for 3 or 4 questions into a paragraph, and helping create that report, please let me know. If we break it up in small chunks, it should be easy to knock out relatively.
I'm happy to.
All right. Jane, is that, oh, yes, okay, yes. What am I supposed to call? Calling for adjournment, however we do it.
You can
You
just
can
say,
say no further business before us. The meeting is adjourned.
There you go. Carla out, that's how I prefer to say it. Thank you, everyone.
Good night, y'all.
Good night.
Bye.